Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to be analyzing Barbauld's poem Inscription for an Ice House and relating it to our current moment during COVID-19. Now that being said, I understand that COVID-19 has been really painful for a lot of people and that looking at current news stories surrounding it is not always the most pleasant thing to do. It can be very stressful. So I just sort of wanted to provide a bit of a disclaimer here that that's what this video is doing, and just to sort of like warn off any people who don't want that in their lives right now. Yeah, so that being said, without further ado, let's start analyzing the poem here, where then we will proceed by relating it to our current moment. So, in the poem Inscription for an Ice House, one of the sort of main themes that I saw emerge was how in preserving objects, they end up becoming, in preserving objects sort of through this like desire to make time last forever and sort of fight the progression of time, those objects ultimately become deprived of their essence. And to sort of begin this, we have this image of a giant sitting in the middle of summer, right? This giant who's sort of like controlling winter. And I'm going to read the following line. Here he piles while summer glows around and southern gales dissolve the fainting world, his treasured snows within the rugged cave. Now, something I immediately noticed in this passage was the connection between the fainting world and his treasured snows, right? We most definitely have a disconnect sort of between this giant as he sits separated from the temporary fleeting world around him. But we also have that this fleeting world, right? These southern gales that dissolve the fainting world, right? That fainting world is grammatically sort of framed here as his treasured snows, right? The fainting world in this sense is then like transformed into his treasured snows. And when we look at like what we see sort of like the giant piling in that, he is piling like these treasured snows, right? So in this sense, it's not only that like the giant is sitting separated from the external world, he's actively extracting from the external world, right? And inherent to this idea of treasured snows is also transformation. When we think of snow, what is snow but frozen ice? And that's one of the most bland things you can have, right? Frozen ice doesn't really have a taste, doesn't really do much of anything. And in this sense, frozen ice is also sort of deprived of its substance, especially when we consider what was initially being extracted, right? Specifically like that fainting world. And later on in the poem, right, we see like this really becomes true when he talks about how he congeals the melting peach in his icebox, right? Where here the melting peach is what would be being extracted, and sort of like the temporariness of that melting peach is really affirmed in that line alone, because for something to melt is for it to change from a solid to a liquid, right? And the peach is expiring in the sentence as we read it aloud. But in the icebox, right, the melting peach is being congealed, and to congeal something is to turn it from a liquid into a solid, right? So in this sense, it's almost as if in the icebox, the melting peach isn't allowed to be a melting peach. Yes, we're trying to preserve time and we're trying to preserve the melting peach, but in doing so, we congeal the melting peach, right? And a melting peach that can't melt isn't a melting peach at all, right? And through this sort of like excessive hoarding and this excessive piling, ultimately, as we try and stop time, these ultimately become reduced. Moreover, sort of generally speaking, later on when the giant is compared to Samson and Hercules, right, we have these two figures who are giants themselves with amazing power, and their power is being used to sort of satisfy the whims of the crowd in Gaza, or these like girls who Hercules is helping, right? And it's almost a misuse of power in the sense that the power could be used to achieve so much good, right? But it's just done in such like with such folly, or it's treated with such like lightheartedness, right? But the other really important aspect here is a semicolon sort of follows these similes where we then start to talk about the peach, right? But we also have the giants of Samson and Hercules framed as actively satisfying the crowd with their power. You know, they're the subject of the sentence, and then the crowd, right? These girls or these boys are the object, right? Who they're acting upon. And in the same sense, we have the giant acting upon the melting peach, right? So in these crowds, sort of like partaking in the wonders of the preservation of time, and the giant in that, they ultimately are acted upon in the same way as the peach, right? And in that sense too, you know, the crowd and the collective also become deprived of their substance. I think this is incredibly relevant to COVID-19 today, especially sort of with the recent outbreak of the Omnicron variant in South Africa and Canada's response to that. So when we consider COVID-19, in many ways, COVID-19 as a pandemic functions as Summer did in the poem, right? As a pandemic, you know, COVID-19 affects the entirety of the world, right? It puts us all and it treats everyone as a whole, you know, where we're no longer discussing food, right, or trying to preserve food, but we're trying to preserve our health, right? And what COVID acts to do is it constantly reminds us that our health is fleeting and that our health is at risk and at danger, right? And that in that way, you know, humans in Canada as well as humans in Africa are very much on the same playing field and in the same collective, right? But what we sort of see, you know, is that the Canadian government acting as a giant and just sort of our systems of government in general, right? Where Canada is the icebox that's trying to preserve the health of its citizens, right? In this sense, you know, like Canada is very much extracting from the world around it, right? It's extracting vaccines and all these resources which are afforded from its position of power in society, and then it's closing itself off from the rest of the world, which is very much what has happened right now with the Omicron variant, right? Because Canada has closed off its borders to all travel to South Africa that's non-essential, right? Canada has extracted its resources that it's needed, and then it's closed itself off. You know, it's piled them up and it's shut the vault to the icebox, right? And sort of what I see as the general issue of this, you know, is human beings themselves are becoming commodified, right? Just as how in the poem we had the crowd enjoying the pleasures that the giants offered, right? And in doing so, they became commodified and compared to peaches. By enjoying sort of the fruit of the preservation of our own health, humans become nothing more than their immediate biological health, right? As we are preserved within the icebox, you know, South Africa becomes nothing more than a vector of disease, and we become nothing more than, again, our own immediate biological health that needs to be preserved. So I think that's rather troubling. And, you know, I say we got to open the doors on the icebox, right? Which is what some of these doctors have suggested, you know, with delivering vaccine rollout globally and sort of emphasizing that, as opposed to, you know, like isolating South Africa, which and putting it in a very precarious position. But yeah, that's all. And thank you everyone for watching. I hope you have a good time wherever you are.